This year marks 100 years of wonder at Disney. Yeah, as in wonder how they screwed up so badly. Aside from Guardians 3, there really is not much to celebrate for Disney this year, is there? What, with the countless streaming bombs, box office bombs, a Pixar movie that just broke even, and not to mention the countless lawsuits that just keep coming. And then we have Disney's Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Now, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was known as the bad Indiana Jones movie, but it still profited at the box office and made good money. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, on the other hand, audiences chose not to see it, and not only did it make less than half of what Indy 4 made, but it cost a heck of a lot more too. The movie reportedly cost a whopping $300 million before marketing, making it one of the most expensive movies ever made, with analysts even saying that it would barely make its money back even if it made $1 billion. And as a result of its low final figure, Indy 5 is expected to lose Disney hundreds of millions of dollars. Lucasfilm under Disney is now not only responsible for the first Star Wars film to lose money, but also the first Indiana Jones movie to lose money. And now we have 2 Indiana Jones movies that audiences hate. But which one do they, or more specifically, I hate the most? We're about to find out. Let the battle commence. Now, the stories of both these movies are really quite out there, and that is saying something given the supernatural elements in the first 3 installments. In Kingdom of the Crystal Skull we have aliens, and in the Dial of Destiny we have time travel. Now honestly, as crazy as these 2 concepts are, I personally didn't mind them. What I did mind is how these movies both set things up and then get so distracted by their crazy concepts that they completely forget to conclude the other plot points that they set up. For example, with Indiana Jones 4, by the time we reach the end and you see the characters back home, it dawns on you that a lot of stuff got kind of pushed off to the side, such as Indy being fired and the FBI being suspicious of him. But it dawns on you even more in the 5th movie, because they left one gigantic thing unresolved, and that is the fact that the movie did absolutely nothing to rectify the fact that Indy was framed for murder and is the top suspect. Yeah, Phoebe Waller-Bridge's character gets him in trouble and brings the bad guys to him, and he ends up being framed for the murders that they committed. So Indy tries to pursue her so he can get proof of his innocence. But the movie never exonerates Indy of these false accusations, and by the end, it expects you to believe that he lives happily ever after, when in reality, the authorities could be knocking at his door at any moment after we cut to credits. On what planet is that a satisfying ending and send-off for this character? Indy 4 forgot to resolve a couple things too, but the ending still made sense and was a fine way to end Indiana Jones' story with a new life ahead of him. Indy 5 just ends the same way as Indy 4, but with a massive plot hole. Additionally, whereas Indiana Jones 4 is about the same length as the first 3 films and really moves along at a brisk pace, Indiana Jones 5 stalls and is the only movie in the franchise that is well over 2 hours. And for the first time, I really felt the length of an Indiana Jones movie. And that is, in big part, down to that lack of beautifully executed and seamless Spielberg pacing, which is part of Spielberg and Indiana Jones' charm, and it was blatantly absent from the pacing of Indy 5. We will talk more about this in the action segment. Now, all the Indiana Jones movies had fantastic comedy, with the third being my personal favourite, but the comedy in Indy 5 felt very generic. The comedy in the first 4 movies had that Spielberg wit and cheekiness to it, and I can recall laughing several times. But in Indy 5, I think I smiled once or twice, but for the life of me, I can't even remember what I smiled at. I thought there were too many flaws with the story for Indy 5, and the huge unresolved plot point really soured the ending of his story. Whereas the ending that we got in Indy 4 made a lot more sense as an ending to this franchise, leaving it open for more adventures while simultaneously giving it a nice bookend. So although the story is certainly not great for reasons we will discuss later, with regards to tone, pacing, and the overall conclusion, the movie that has the superior story is Indiana Jones 4. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is exactly what you would expect from iconic male characters represented in the modern day. So that means he's a failed father, he's getting divorced, he's depressed, he has broken relationships with his family, his students no longer admire him, he loses his job, he's an old hermit, and has nothing to live for. And he can now join other old hermits like Han Solo in The Force Awakens, Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi, Dewey in Scream 5, Picard in the first 2 seasons of his show, Buzz in Lightyear, Nick Fury in Secret Invasion, and the list goes on. At least The Flash treated Michael Keaton's Batman with respect. This seems seems to be Disney's go-to, that the character is an old hermit who everyone sees as washed up. Not to mention that he is just a tag-along that follows Phoebe Waller-Bridge on her archaeological travels, because remember, the reason he goes is to exonerate himself because her actions led him to get framed for murder. So he doesn't even properly drive this story, she does. Whereas the whole point of Indiana Jones is that he loves to go on adventures. I would rather have had Salah go with him, and the poor guy was practically begging to go on one more journey, but he is only here for a quick cameo and gets turned down. Because we gotta have the other character be Phoebe Waller-Bridge for some reason. I genuinely don't know why they went with this kind of approach that has been the undoing of Disney's run at Lucasfilm in the past. There are better stories that you can do with these beloved male characters without having to resort to the same old hermit story, such as what Rocky Balboa and the Creed movies did and how they kept the character of Rocky relevant. He had lost people important to him, but by no means was he a hopeless failure in his relationships and a cranky old hermit that just wanted to die. But in this new age of Hollywood pandering, they have kept on trying to beat these male characters down, and I'm really sick of it, because it has practically become a trope within the industry, so the female characters could shine at the expense of their male counterparts. Meanwhile, in Indiana Jones 4, Indy is still played by an older Harrison Ford, but he's still a lot of fun to be around, and the right amount of grumpy. He has that wisecracking personality, the movie is more upbeat and energetic, and has this optimism where you can't help but smile. I even like how confident and put together he is, such as when he very calmly tells Mutt that he doesn't have to get so emotional and angry.
We're a lot of Marys, kid.
Shut up, that's my mother you're talking about.
You don't have to get sore all the time just to prove how tough you are. Sit down. Please, sit down.
Clearly, this is something that Phoebe Waller-Bridge's character had to be told, but we'll get to that later. I also love how he takes charge and is so respected by even the Soviets that when he agrees to help them, he just starts asking for things and the Soviets instantly give it to him and are in awe at his methods. I mean, he could have asked for an escape route at this point and they would have given it to him. It just shows what a reputation and legacy the character has built at this stage in his life. My only complaint with Indy in the fourth movie is that he is too invincible. It's like the movie knows that Indiana Jones is an iconic character now, and rather than portraying him as a man like the first three films did, the movie portrays him more like a superhero. And although I appreciate the respectable level of status they have given him, I never quite felt that he was pushed as hard as he was in the first three films. But Indy 5 just goes with the old deconstruct the beloved male character trope. But they never deconstruct the female characters, do they? They seem to always have their shit together. And they didn't even do the depressed character development right. For example, when Indy is asked what he would do if he could go back in time, he says, "I would go back and tell my son not to enlist in the war." And I for sure thought that was this movie's way of foreshadowing what was going to happen later once he gets hold of the Dial of Destiny. But it didn't. It didn't even cross his mind. And then we get to the end of the movie where Indy decides that he wants to stay in the past and he's got nothing to live for in his own time period. Now, it was at this moment that I thought the old hermit character arc could potentially have redeemed itself if Indiana Jones had realized that he did have things in his life worth living for, kind of like how Peter Parker in Into the Spider-Verse came to that same realization. This would be like an extension of the realization he got in The Last Crusade when he makes the choice to let the Holy Grail go, but on a bigger, more internal emotional level. But then the scene was instantly ruined by Phoebe Waller-Bridge's character making that choice for him by knocking him out, and then he wakes up in his home. This really got under my skin because it deprived Indy of pivotal development. Because imagine if in The Last Crusade, Indy was so tempted to reach for the Holy Grail, but his father knocked him out, and then we cut to them being back at home, and he said, "Yes, I brought you back because you would have gone for the Grail and died, Junior." That would deprive Indy of the character development where he chose to let the Holy Grail go, and it would have felt anticlimactic as fuck. And well, that's how I felt about this movie. Indy never made a definitive choice in this film, and the one time he had the chance to, it was taken away from him. I can go on forever, but I really did not like the way they handled Indiana Jones and his development in this movie. I personally found his character arc uninvesting. James Mangold is a fantastic director, and he has done the story of a beaten down legend so incredibly well in Logan, and no one has been able to top it, including himself. This kind of depressed character arc doesn't fit a franchise like this, and it's just been played out so many times in Hollywood that as soon as this movie was announced, I immediately predicted that this is what they were going to do with his character. And once they announced that's what they were going to do, I just rolled my eyes. And despite giving it a genuine chance, I tuned out very quickly. At least Indy 4 gave us the fun and passionate character that we know and love, and also gave him a family by the end of the movie, which felt like a much better ending for the character. In Indy 5, he suddenly gets back together with Marion, and I don't even know how they got their stuff sorted out. The movie doesn't even explain it to you. They just sort of do, and it felt very quick and abrupt, almost like this ending was done in reshoots, which I am almost certain it was, and it straight up did not work. So the movie with superior representation of Indiana Jones is Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. So let's talk about the sidekicks. Now in Indy 4 we have Shia LaBeouf, and I gotta tell ya, the second he showed up, the movie lost some of its Indiana Jones feel. There is just something about Shia that whenever he shows up, his on-screen persona kind of stinks up the place. And there is something very strange about his performance too, and that is that 1 second he looks perfectly normal, but then we cut to the next shot where out of nowhere, he's in the middle of doing some serious crying. And this happened a couple times. I mean, could he not cry on command so they had to cut to it or something? And the character that he is crying about, the movie doesn't even attempt to convincingly sell his relationship with them. They keep it very vague, and I just thought it didn't work. Now that being said, I surprisingly didn't hate Shia in this. I thought I would, but it was right at about this scene where I actually liked the different kind of interaction and rapport that Indy had with him. It is also helped by the fact that Shia is usually very loud, and he showed signs of that at first, but he became very quiet throughout the rest of the movie, which made him much more tolerable. And I was surprised to find that I actually got used to him as the movie went on. And the main reason is because he and Indy talk to each other like normal human beings, and it's interesting to see how Indiana Jones talks to a younger person. And not just any young person, but one who's dropped out of school, and Indy surprisingly gives him some serious yet sympathetic advice. And then his tone completely changes when he finds out he is his own son.
Maybe I will, Teach. You got a problem with that?
No, not if that's what you love doing. Don't let anybody tell you different.
You're not my dad, okay?
You bet I am, and I got news for you. You're gonna go back and finish school.
Really? What happened if there's not a damn thing wrong with the kid and don't let anybody else tell you any different? You don't remember saying that?
That was before I was your father!
There are also a couple of things that Mutt catches on to that Indy doesn't, and Indy is actually impressed with him.
Footprints, somebody's been here.
Same size, could have been the same person twice.
Not bad, kid.
And I found moments like that to be really nice, and it doesn't feel like the characters are competing with each other. It actually feels like teamwork. The complete opposite of that is Phoebe Waller-Bridge's character, Helena. Now, Helena is Indy's goddaughter, but you wouldn't know that based on their conversations.
I'm her godfather,
related.
and she's up past her bedtime. Come on, Wombat.
I wouldn't do that. You're out of your depth, Jonesy.
Jonesy.
He thinks I'm the criminal. He's the one wanted for murder.
I didn't kill anyone, and you know it, Helen.
Now, I knew that right from the trailers, this was going to be the typical strong female character that is designed to talk down to Indy, be just as knowledgeable as him, belittle him, and be presented as likable when really she is the opposite. But I completely rid that from my mind when I went into this movie and gave her a fair shot. And yet, in her very first scene, she is giving off these very snarky and narcissistic vibes in Indy's class. Just the way she answers questions in Indy's classroom and gets all the questions right, the arrogance and snark she exuberates made her instantly unlikable. It felt like the movie was trying to show how smart she was when really it just came across like she had a superiority complex. And I was amazed that it made her so unlikable right from the start. And those aren't even her best hits. Throughout the movie, she's condescending, snarky, and there is an ugly arrogance to her that makes the majority of scenes where she opens her mouth really off-putting, and not charming like the movie wants you to think.
How did you end up like this?
I mean, resourceful, daring, beautiful, self-sufficient!
Yep, self-sufficient. Someone actually wrote that as dialogue for this movie. And this leads us to her interactions with Indy. There's actually a scene in this movie where they are testing each other on their knowledge, and when she knew the answer to stuff without his help, it always felt like she would throw it in his face. I mean, in Indiana Jones 4, when Mutt knew the odd bit of information, it's graceful, it's nice, and you see that Indiana Jones is very impressed that a kid knows a bit of information that didn't immediately come to him. And Shia didn't throw it in his face when he knew something either, so this shows how Indy would react when a kid knows more information. It actually brings a smile to his face. But they don't show that side of Indy here, because the producer and CEO of Lucasfilm, Kathleen Kennedy, is a crazy feminist that follows the belief that you have to belittle or outsmart the male characters to prop up the female characters. A boys versus girls mentality, if you will, where the men lose, have lost everything in their life, are washed up, have nothing to live for, and just want to die. Which is the whole basis of the character of Rey in the Disney sequel trilogy, that she was a female Luke Skywalker, but didn't need the training that he did, with the Force or with a lightsaber.
I mean, bravo for them to make Rey a orphan from the desert who discovers inner powers, inherits a robot with important information that leads to the destruction of the Death Star. It's fresh because it's a woman.
And sadly, this feels like another female character from Kathleen Kennedy where it's a boys versus girls mentality, and it didn't need that. Heck, this is so boys versus girls that she even has her own Short Round 2.0, who she found in the exact same way that Indy found Short Round in the Temple of Doom.
Where did you find your little bodyguard?
I didn't find him. I caught him. He's been living on the street since he was 4. I caught him trying to pick my pocket. Didn't I, short stuff?
Where'd you find him?
He tried to steal my purse outside a casino in Marrakesh when he was 10. I hit him repeatedly with my car door, but he didn't let go, and neither did I, so... been together ever since.
Much like Rey, Helena comes across like she was designed to replace the original franchise lead, and that means giving them as many similarities with a male character as possible. And believe it or not, but if you want to see the exact same character dynamic done right, then watch Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. Haley Atwell's character is shockingly similar to Phoebe Waller-Bridge's. Grace uses Ethan so she can steal an item that she and the bad guys are looking for. The two have car chases where they have to take the wheel and drive each other. She leaves him for dead, figures out a riddle quicker than he does, doesn't tell him that the bad guys are coming and waits till the last minute, and they both team up and help each other to take down the bad guys. Yet the character was interesting, likable, and it was fun to see the two team up and outsmart each other. It never felt like they were trying to dumb the male character down just to uplift the female character. This is how you execute this kind of dynamic, and there was more growth between these two characters than there were between these two. And there is no relation between these two characters. They're both strangers, so their relationship can be hostile, and one can leave the other for dead if they wanted to. But Helena, she's supposed to be Indiana Jones's goddaughter, and she royally screws him over. The way she leaves him for dead, gets him framed for murder, constantly calls him an old man, and keeps being snarky, arrogant, and disobedient towards him. It just made her a bitch.
I like the hat, by the way. Makes you look at least 2 years younger. She thinks I'm a criminal. He's the one wanted for murder. Nice big picture in the New York Herald.
I didn't kill anyone. And you know it, Helen.
I'm not the one that's engaged to a mobster!
I don't need morality lessons from an aging grave robber.
And the Wright brothers were born during the Civil War.
Oh, I thought maybe you went to school with them.
Oh, come on, Indy. That was funny.
Funny.
What is the time, by the way?
It's...
Hey, look there.
Give me that back. That was my father's watch.
Look, I know what they're going for, but Indiana Jones is a humbled and respected man. He's not some rude, narcissistic asshole where it's funny to make jokes at his expense. Not to mention that the very people that framed him for murder and ruined his life are the ones insulting him to his face and calling him old. And what, we're supposed to find it funny? It's just downright disrespectful and uncomfortable to watch. It would be disrespectful to any elderly character, but especially one as beloved as Indiana Jones. One thing I can say about Rey is that she was horribly written, but the character was likable. Helena is not. She has a very condescending personality. She is artificially written and incredibly toxic. And the movie just expects you to look past and ignore all that and take this hostile behavior as quirky character development. And I didn't like her character before, but I really didn't like her character after watching Haley Atwell in Mission Impossible 7. There comes a point where you start to ask, are you supposed to be the plucky sidekick or the villain?
He thinks I'm a criminal. He's the one wanted for murder.
I didn't kill anyone. And you know it, Helen.
She is annoying, has a very pompous tone whenever she speaks to Indy. There was no chemistry between the two, and I found their relationship grating. And she's never apologetic for any of the things she says and does throughout the film. In the other movies, all the sidekicks that Indy is teamed up with, whatever bickering they had, they eventually work out any hard feelings. And they all had chemistry. But there is no chemistry between these two, and any chemistry that this movie thinks that it's creating is artificial and just comes across as fake. At the end of the day, the relationship between Indy and Mutt is a lot more friendly to watch than whatever messed up relationship he has with Phoebe Waller-Bridge. And there are just nice little jokes with Indy and Mutt's relationship too, such as this scene where Mutt takes a beer and Indy nonchalantly puts it back mid-conversation. That got a laugh out of me. But in the 5th movie, they say that Mutt died because he signed up for the war. Yeah, they basically just wrote Shia LaBeouf's character out, and I thought that was a very bad call. I mean, Harrison Ford and Shia LaBeouf have had a little controversy in the past after the 4th movie was released, but if they didn't want Shia back, then they should have recast the role, just like what Stallone did with his son in Rocky Balboa. Don't completely write the character out, you could really do something with him. Maybe they could have recast him and this movie could have been a father-son story, one that had a direct contrast between the father-son adventure between Indy and his father in The Last Crusade. Or maybe they could have done what everyone wanted and put Short Round in the movie. But no, again, the movie desperately wanted to pair him up with Phoebe Waller-Bridge. And honestly, who asked for that? Aside from Kathleen Kennedy, who, incidentally, hired her as the SJW droid in Solo, a Star Wars story. Oh, and Short Round 2.0 suddenly knowing how to pilot a plane was absolutely ridiculous, and I found him to be incredibly forgettable and irritating too. And he was also disrespectful to Indy. He learned from the best, I suppose. Now, Helena does calm down in the last half of the movie and stops acting like such a bitch, but I didn't buy it, as it just comes out of nowhere. A person that would leave her godfather for dead and mock him for being wanted for the murders of his co-workers that she brought to his doorstep does not suddenly make a 180 like this. The movie thought it was time for these two to get along now, so they abruptly wrote them that way, and it felt manipulative and rushed. So much so that I wonder if her sudden attitude change was also part of the reshoots. And her performance when she had to plead with Indy, it looked like Phoebe Waller-Bridge was really struggling to break down, and I didn't buy it. It just seemed like fake crocodile tears. So there are other side characters in both movies too, such as Antonio Banderas. Man, what a waste. But in my opinion, when it's all said and done, the movie with the superior side characters is Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. A lot of people have been praising the opening 20 minutes of The Dial of Destiny, which is an extended flashback scene of Indiana Jones on a train, and I thought, if anything, it sounds like a very safe bet that it's going to be awesome, and I was really looking forward to seeing it, and as I was watching it, I was very disappointed. Now, the opening definitely has great moments that felt like classic Spielberg, but the whole time I couldn't help but feel that it felt off. And I think that was in big part due to the pacing. In the previous 4 movies, as soon as the action got going, it was non-stop until the end of the sequence. But in Indy 5's opening, the action would start and the adrenaline would come in, and then it would come to a complete halt to show a super slow scene of people talking. And it would constantly do this. There was never a point where the action stayed in the spotlight, whereas the opening action scenes in all of the previous Indiana Jones movies, including the 4th one, had their exposition at the start, and then it would stay with the action. And they all had that great sense of Spielberg pacing and fun that never let up. But Indy 5 doesn't even have that going for it, especially on top of that train, which was so dark. And you can tell that they did that to hide the bad CGI. And the first time we have the iconic and badass Indiana Jones theme play, it is being played to an obvious CGI double of Indy jumping on a train. And it completely took me out of the triumphant scene and made it feel very phony. And I wouldn't be surprised if this entire exterior sequence was CGI, and I don't understand why they didn't film this practically. I mean, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning was released very shortly after this, and that movie has characters aboard a real train. As a matter of fact, so did the opening of Indiana Jones 3, so you telling me that they couldn't even have gotten a stunt double to do it in Indy 5, so they went with CGI, which this movie does a lot, by the way. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if this whole shot is CGI. And the de-aging effect ranged from decent to obviously CGI. But what ultimately ruins the illusion is that they didn't de-age Harrison Ford's voice.
I like to be alone. We got a lot of nice stuff.
I mean, did they forget or something? If so, that's like half of the effect missing. Also, unlike the Spielberg Indy movies, there were certain action sequences that were completely unnecessary and just stopped the movie. In the first 4 films, action scenes would happen very naturally, but in Indy 5, it's like they checked their watch and were like, oh, there hasn't been an action scene in a while, let's quickly write one in. I mean, at one point, the guy that was chasing them was essentially an angry ex-boyfriend, who was also a man baby because 2023.
You're in pajamas.
I was sleeping, Elena.
Run off!
This is your new man?
No.
What you... Hey!
And even the stakes felt very off. One example is at the end of the movie, they say that we need to hurry, the portal is going to close. But that portal is open for freaking ages and it never closes. So the tension that was initially there started to deplete very quickly because you knew the movie was bluffing. And movies always tend to bluff, but it all comes down to execution and how you fool the audience. And this movie really wasn't fooling me. As for the action in Indy 4, well, first off, the opening action scene was much better than Indy 5's opening. The pacing between the talking and action was very well distributed, the exposition was delivered at the beginning, and once the action got going, it never kept stopping. And it's badass whilst also playing into Indy's old age. The scene where he swings with his whip and fails, that was hilarious and got me to laugh out loud. And there were some cool stunts right from the offset, and especially in the chase sequence later. This to me was the best action scene in the movie. The whole opening action scene was an absolute joy, and watching this this right after watching Dial of Destiny, there is a big difference. The fun element was severely lacking in Indy 5, but Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was full of fun right from the offset. Although how the car crashed and Ray Winston survived and ended up outside the car in the next shot didn't make sense and was a weird edit. Now, this movie has an annoying over-reliance on CGI as well, which is not good. And yes, the nuke surviving fridge makes no sense. But guess what? Neither did all of this in the first 3 movies, so I'm willing to look past this. It was really over the top, but so was the other stuff in the previous films. The monkey swinging, on the other hand, I don't have an excuse for. That was really dumb. And what was dumber is that the monkeys joined the fight. That was just too much, even for this franchise. Now, Indy 5 also really pushed things, but they aren't things that are done for jokes. They are big things that you're meant to take seriously, such as Mads Mikkelsen surviving a hit to the head on a fast-moving train. A hit like that would usually kill the villains in any other movie. But he survives it, and he has no scar to show for it later. Well, why? James Mangold knows he's not making an X-Men movie, right? The movie clearly wanted him to live, but then why did they make him take a hit like that? Also, the big henchmen usually get killed off in a really fun and violent way in these movies, and even Indy 4 does this. The big henchman in Dial of Destiny, however, dies off-screen, and Indy had nothing to do with it. It was Short Round 2.0, and that was so disappointing. Now, the action scene I was most looking forward to going by the trailers was the parade chase, but in the end, it didn't last long and was just meh. The best action scene of the movie to me was Indy's escape when Helena leaves him to die. I thought that was pretty damn awesome. The rest, including this chase sequence, just felt underwhelming to me. And honestly, I thought the worst action of the movie was the climax. Indy contributes absolutely nothing and is tied up the entire climax, and this way, Kathleen Kennedy gets what she really wanted and has Helena take charge of the big final action scene and rescue a tied up Indy. Because that's what we all wanted to see in his final movie, right? And of course, let's not forget to point out what it is that we're doing. For all the strong female characters out there.
I didn't come here to rescue you from your fiancé.
Rescue me?
What are you doing here?
Rescuing you!
And then, Short Round 2.0 figures out how to fly a plane, and I was already tuned out at this point. So the action is one of the highlights of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, but it was just boring in Indy 5, and that really was disappointing. But the lack of pacing, the lack of energy, and the lack of Indy made the action in Indy 5 a big letdown. Whereas, aside from some annoyances, I felt that Spielberg still had the core of the action down in Indy 4. So the movie with the superior action is Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I always thought that Cate Blanchett looked so freaking weird in this movie, and it's mainly down to that wig and that accent. That aside, she plays the villain pretty well, but it's her motivation that was very meh. She wants to seek the ultimate knowledge from aliens. Okay, then what are you gonna do? And do you have to be an evil Soviet with henchmen to achieve that? The more you break down her methods, the less sense it makes. Whereas Mads Mikkelsen plays a villain who wants the Dial of Destiny so he can travel back in time and make the Nazis win the war. So his motivation is much better as a villain. But, and this might be a hot topic here, but I thought his performance was dull and boring. Mads Mikkelsen started out as a very impressive actor, and he really found his calling in playing villains. But after we've seen him do it so many times with little to no notable differences, I'm honestly just bored of it. His performance is so underplayed to the point that it just comes across as a tired performance that has just been recycled rather than innovated and built upon. I like how he started out as a bit squeamish and everything, but then in the future he just becomes Mads Mikkelsen villain. And this is a shame because I remember seeing him in the trailer and I thought he looked like a really good Indiana Jones villain, but he, again, was just very boring. There was nothing about his character or his performance where I was like, I'm going to remember that. I mean, even Cate Blanchett, I remember how weird she was, but I don't remember anything about him, except for having a super hard head. Honestly, I'm paying more attention to his brother, Lars Mikkelsen, right now. He did a great job as Magnussen in Sherlock Series 3, he's done a great job voicing Admiral Thrawn, and at the time of this recording, he hasn't shown up in the Ahsoka show yet, but I'm highly anticipating his performance there as well. Both of these villains have their pros and cons in reverse. Cate Blanchett has the worst motivation but better performance, and Mikkelsen has the better motivation and worse performance. So I think both of these villains are very underwhelming as far as Indiana Jones villains go. So I was really struggling to find a winner in this this round, so I decided to let some more time pass and let me reflect on the two villains. And I gotta say, as more time went on, I just started to forget about Mads Mikkelsen's villain more and more. And that's something that I cannot say about any of Spielberg's villains. They are all memorable to an extent. Some are better than others, but you still remember all of them, and their role in each movie. And I gotta say, Cate Blanchett was more memorable than Mads Mikkelsen. So, I'm not really giving a true winner here because I think both of these villains lose, but if I had to give the slight edge, I would give it to Cate Blanchett, because she is someone that at the very least, I can still remember. And she also had less conveniences than Mikkelsen did. If I had to describe The Dial of Destiny in one word, it would be boring. What'd you think of the story?
Boring.
What'd you think of the characters?
Boring.
What'd you think of the side characters?
Boring.
The action?
Boring.
The
boring.
A little bored, are we?
Yes!
The movie visually, when it's not using green screen, actually looks really good. In fact, I'd say it looks better than Kingdom of the Crystal Skull does, but that doesn't really matter when everything else about the movie feels so hollow. If you couldn't tell, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny doesn't live up to the legacy of the original 3 films, and it doesn't even live up to the 4th. And given the absolute shit show that Disney has done with Lucasfilm, this movie is not going to win their audience back. The brand has been damaged, the trust from fans is gone, and the poor box office clearly reflects that. Did I hate the movie? Parts of it, but the movie as a whole? No. The movie is just incredibly dull. Not only is it the first Indiana Jones movie that made me bored, but it actually made me want to pull out my phone at times. That doesn't usually happen to me when I'm watching movies, let alone a franchise that I'm a fan of like Indiana Jones, but it just felt like a big load of nothing as I was watching it. This is the very definition of a forced cash-grabbing sequel, from the same studio that has been making nothing but forced cash-grabbing sequels. I'm not going to say that Indiana Jones 4 is a great movie, it's not. If anything, the more you think about it, the weaker it gets, but it still felt like an Indiana Jones movie, crafted by the original creators, flaws and all. Even though it wasn't anywhere near as good as the original trilogy, the pacing, the lightheartedness, and the spirit of the source material was still there, and for me anyway, it made it more than watchable, especially if you watch it after seeing The Dial of Destiny. It's time for the scores. Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull gets an above average 6 out of 10, and The Dial of Destiny, originally I was going to give it a below average 4, but as I was writing this video, I was starting to forget about it, which is shocking because I hadn't seen Kingdom of the Crystal Skull for over a decade before making this video, and I still remembered a lot of stuff from that movie, but Indy 5 is already leaving me. So upon further reflection, the movie goes down even further to a 3 out of 10. Just like how the Disney sequels gave people a newfound appreciation for the prequels, The Dial of Destiny has given me a newfound appreciation for Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Indy 5, much like the Disney Star Wars sequel trilogy, just doesn't have a soul. And his treatment of the title male character being turned into another broken down old hermit who just wants to die, honestly, how can you not get fed up of that? The writing was on the wall for how much of a car wreck this movie was going to be when both George Lucas and Steven Spielberg completely left the project due to Kathleen Kennedy's poor handling of another one of Lucasfilm's franchises. And it said that the original ending had Indiana Jones die of his gunshot wound and that Helena ends up replacing him and redoing all his accomplishments throughout the 4 movies via time travel, including obtaining the artifact from Raiders without triggering the boulder, because we gotta show how much smarter she is than Indiana Jones, but Kathleen Kennedy was ordered to reshoot it by Disney CEOs Bob Chapek and even Bob Iger when he came back to the company. And honestly, I don't doubt it, because the ending feels like a reshoot. As soon as she punches him and we cut to black, this easily could have been where they placed the reshoot, and given the crazy amount of money that this movie has cost, it all adds up, with even audio of John Williams saying that he had to do new music for a new ending.
So we have just about completed the film. We have maybe another ending to shoot and to record maybe in a couple of weeks.
And well, this explains why George Lucas looked upset the whole premiere and why Steven Spielberg takes a massive swipe at Kathleen Kennedy and did not credit her or her husband Frank Marshall for the legacy of Indiana Jones.
Hold up. One more thing. One last thing. Okay, one last thing. There are 3 indispensable people without whom none of us would be here tonight, and that starts with the person who created Indiana Jones, George Lucas. The person who is Indiana Jones, Harrison Ford. And the person who is the glue to all 5 of these films that gave us all of our rhythm and all of our melody, the great maestro, John Williams.
They both thought they were gonna get mentioned, but they didn't. Hence, she didn't clap once she heard John Williams' name instead of hers. And I love how Spielberg gives a sly smile to Harrison after what he did. Kennedy has been Steven's assistant since the first Indiana Jones movie, and this clearly shows how there's drama within the family, that he publicly humiliated her like that. With this one strike, Spielberg essentially cancelled her in Hollywood. Hence, she is now trying to sell her property, which is where her and a bunch of other Hollywood snob types would get together and have cocktail parties where they pat each other on the back and talk about their upcoming projects. She doesn't seem to have any need for it anymore. I wonder why. It would appear she has failed their characters for the last time. Again, look at Rocky Balboa. That movie dealt with an older version of a beloved hero, where the previous movie left a bad taste in audiences' mouths. And he was sadder in the movie. He lost everything, most importantly his wife Adrian, but he still felt like Rocky. The same with when he lost Paulie, and when he became estranged from his son. The spirit of Rocky was still incredibly palpable, whilst also putting him in an emotionally low place. But he didn't come across as a pathetic, dried up old man. The movie had respect for him. But with movies nowadays, there is no respect. The iconic male character has to be washed up, he has to be talked down to. And we have a character here that is disguised as a bantering sidekick, when really they used her to talk smack about him. Again, going back to Rocky, he had a scene which had no action, just dialogue. And it's one of the best scenes in all of cinema. And it absolutely trounces any political speeches we get in movies nowadays. That is the kind of approach and respect that I wanted to see with Indiana Jones, and I didn't see it. I just saw the generic old tactics of Kathleen Kennedy, and the director, James Mangold, he has already done this kind of story incredibly well with a beloved hero. But this movie, it just doesn't feel like he has done it with the same level of heart or respect. Logan is a character that fits a depressed story arc like this, but Indiana Jones, he does not. From what I hear, this is the straw that broke the camel's back, and based on Hollywood insider Cameron Pasha and the news from his Patreon, Disney have quietly fired Kathleen Kennedy, and in turn, she has left them with a lawsuit which was of her doing, and a studio that has become so damaged that they had to pull its flagship franchise out of theaters and confine it to streaming. This is all down to Disney and Kathleen Kennedy's mishandling of these beloved franchises. And on top of that, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny has contributed to the billion-dollar loss that the company is facing. And I don't feel sorry for them because it was their own fault. And people were telling them this for years, and Disney decided to just call them toxic or Russian bots. And well, those people have just gotten fed up with Disney and have just decided to not turn up anymore, which is evident with Disney's entire box office performance this year. I mean, seriously, look at this. And unfortunately, Indiana Jones is yet another failure due to Disney's absolute ignorance and incompetence. A big thanks to my patrons. With YouTube's ever-increasing copyright claims, it's harder to make a living on this platform, and you really are helping support the channel a great deal. We haven't reached our goal yet, but I am so grateful for those of you that have given a very great start. We are definitely making progress. I have plenty more content and perks on the way, and for those of you that haven't or are unaware, feel free to head on over to my Patreon to get a ton of perks at very low tiers. Remember, once we hit the milestone of 100, I will get to work on the 3-way How to Train Your Dragon Versus video. Thanks so much for watching everyone, and if you want to see more Versus battles, then click on any of the videos that you see on your screen now. And of course, don't forget to comment below and let me know what you think of these two Indiana Jones movies and which ones you prefer. Thanks always for watching guys, and I will catch all of you very soon. Take care.